Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today I'll be talking about bleeding your power steering pump. On this Accord back here, K-Series, I could not get the power steering reservoir to stop foaming. It would overflow literally like every morning. I would pull it in the garage, bleed the power steering system, it would look fine, and then I would park it, and the next morning I'd start it up and it would puke out foam from the reservoir. So I was kind of going in circles for a few days trying to figure it out, but I think I finally got it. Things seem okay now, and the reservoir is not foaming and it's staying at a consistent level. So let me go through and talk about what I actually did to fix it. Alright, so this Accord has the K24 straight 4-cylinder engine, and you can see that power steering reservoir is looking pretty good, not foamy whatsoever. There's the power steering pump. So how this problem came about is I pulled the power steering pump off to do some work, and when I put the pump back on, I hooked everything up like I usually do and started it up, and the pump would just whine and whine and whine like it had no fluid. So I topped off the fluid and drove it around, and it would be foaming. So I was like, what gives? I've taken power steering pumps off numerous vehicles, a ton of Hondas, a lot of D series, couple F series, couple K series, and that issue has never popped up. So I was like, you know, what's going on? So I thought, you know, maybe I just have to bleed the system. So I bled the system, and what I did was I topped off the reservoir, and then I jacked the front of the car up, gave it gas to hold at about 2,000 RPMs, and then lock to lock both ways a couple times. And that is in the hope that it would clear the air bubbles out of the power steering system and everything would be fine. Because that's what foam is. Foam is air in the power steering system. The power steering pump compresses the fluid to high pressure, which goes through there, your high pressure line, down to your steering rack down there. It does what it needs to do, and then as it's coming back to your reservoir, not through here, there's like lines down in the engine bay, but as it's coming back to the reservoir, it's returning to atmospheric pressure, and as it lowers in pressure, it's decompressing, and those air bubbles expand in the power steering fluid, which, you know, causes foam. That's what foam is. Foam is air in the fluid. So I bled the system a couple times. Everything seemed okay. It still kind of whined a little bit, especially at full lock. So I parked it and then came back to it later, the next day, started it up, just foam everywhere. So I was like, what gives? What gives? So I was doing some research, reading up on it, and some people on the Accord forums were recommending the O-ring on the input, the power steering inlet, and the O-ring on the output. Now, the output I don't think is very important as far as foaming goes. This is high pressure fluid, so any leak would be shown with leaking fluid. Fluid would be coming out, not air going in. So I replaced it anyways. It looked fine, but I replaced it. So I came back to this one. The O-ring was not torn or damaged that I could see, but it looked old and maybe a bit stiff. So I replaced that O-ring with a spare one I had on hand, and I double checked this. The other thing that the Accord forum guys were saying is if you don't put this on all the way and then seat this clamp exactly the way it came off, that could cause a leak. Really, the only place air can be introduced in the system is somewhere between the reservoir and the pump. Now if you look at the pump and the reservoir, you can see that the fluid level of the reservoir is lower than the inlet of the pump, which means that the pump has to create a vacuum to suck fluid up this hose into the pump. So if there was a leak here or a leak here from a lack of seal, that could definitely be a place where air could be introduced into the system. Typically down there on that side, it's not too much of an issue because that's below the fluid level, so fluid would want to flow out of any sort of leak at that point. But because this side is above the fluid level, that's where air could be introduced. So I went through like 3 bottles of this Honda Genuine power steering fluid. This is the 3rd bottle, but every time I would start it up in the morning, it would puke out, you know, maybe half to 1 bottle's worth of fluid on the floor. So learn from my experience. Hopefully this can kind of point you in the right direction if you have power steering fluid that's constantly foaming. And you know, like I said earlier, most power steering pumps don't need to be bled that thoroughly. Typically you just put it on, run the car, top the fluid off, and you're good. But in the case where your power steering fluid is a little more fussy, just go ahead, jack the front of the car up, or you can do it on the ground, doesn't really matter. But top the reservoir off, raise the revs to about 2,000 RPMs, and turn the steering wheel lock to lock. And what that's doing is it's having the pump send that high pressure fluid through the system, and by you turning the wheel, it's, you know, getting the high pressure fluid everywhere in the rack and back up to the reservoir. So it's just cycling the fluid through the whole system. So that's about it for this video. Just thought I'd make this quick little video on my issue here with this power steering system. I've never seen this problem before personally. I think I've read about it maybe 1 time. But if any of you have a similar sounding problem to what I had, you know, perhaps it's a bad O-ring. But when you're dealing with power steering systems, you definitely should check all the points that need to seal, as far as like O-rings or hoses to barbed fittings and whatnot. The power steering system is kind of a finicky hydraulic system, and you know, everything has to be sealed up pretty well for it to work properly. But anyways, thanks for watching. Give this video a like if you liked it. Sub to the channel, hit that notification bell, and I'll catch you later.